The night air bit at his skin as he pulled the thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. At 16, Dion should have been worrying about homework and basketball tryouts. Instead, he was figuring out where to sleep tonight that wouldn't get him hassled by police or worse. 3 months had passed since Grandma Lou died. 3 months of trying to make it on his own, because foster care felt like giving up on the only real family he'd ever known. His grandmother had raised him since he was 4, after his mom's struggles with addiction made it impossible for her to care for him. His father had never been in the picture. Just gotta make it 2 more years, Dion whispered to himself, his breath visible in the cool autumn air. 2 more years until he turned 18. 2 more years until he graduated high school. 2 more years until he could legally work full-time without questions being asked about where his parents were. The city park bench had become his thinking spot. Not for sleeping, too exposed, but good for planning his next move while watching the sunset over Atlanta's skyline. The city lights began to twinkle as darkness fell, beautiful but indifferent to his struggles. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since lunch at school. The free lunch program was sometimes the only meal he could count on. Dion reached into his backpack past his carefully maintained school books and pulled out half a sandwich he'd saved from lunch. He'd become an expert at rationing food. A noise startled him, footsteps approaching on the path. Dion tensed, ready to grab his backpack and run if necessary. A man pushing a shopping cart full of bottles and cans appeared under the nearby streetlight. "Evening, young blood," the older man called out. Dion recognized him. Mr. Pete, as everyone called him, was a fixture in this part of town. "Bit cold to be sitting out, ain't it?" "I'm good, Mr. Pete, just thinking," Dion replied, relaxing slightly. The old man nodded knowingly. "Got somewhere to lay your head tonight?" Dion hesitated. He'd been careful not to let anyone know about his situation. His teachers, his classmates, nobody knew he was homeless. He still showed up to school clean, thanks to the community center showers. He still turned in his homework, completed in the library after hours. He was determined not to become a statistic, but Mr. Pete had eyes that seemed to see right through pretenses. Maybe it was because he'd been on the streets himself for years. "I'm working on it," Dion finally answered. Mr. Pete rummaged in his cart and pulled out a slightly battered apple. "Here, got this from the bakery lady. Already ate mine." Dion wanted to refuse, the old man needed it more than him, but his stomach betrayed him with another loud growl. "Thanks," he said, accepting the fruit. "I appreciate it." "You know," Mr. Pete said, leaning on his cart, "the abandoned factory on Willow Street? The blue door on the backside doesn't lock, right? Some folks sleep there when it rains. Safer than the shelter for a young man?" Dion nodded, filing away the information. "The shelters were often more dangerous than the streets for someone his age. Keep your head up, young blood, and keep going to that school. Education's the only thing they can't take from you." With that, Mr. Pete pushed his cart onward, the wheels squeaking into the distance. Dion finished the apple, core and all, then stood up. Time to move. The temperature was dropping and he needed to find somewhere to sleep. The abandoned factory turned out to be a blessing. The blue door, as Mr. Pete had said, opened with a firm push. Inside, the vast space was divided by old machinery and fallen beams. Dion wasn't alone. He could make out 3 other people in different corners, each with their own makeshift bed. But everyone kept to themselves. He found a spot behind some large crates that offered privacy and protection from drafts. Using his backpack as a pillow and his jacket as a blanket, he settled in for the night. Despite his exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. His mind kept racing with worries about tomorrow's algebra test and whether his English teacher would notice he was wearing the same clothes again. He'd been washing his 2 shirts in bathroom sinks, but they were starting to look worn. Morning came too soon. Dion woke before his phone alarm could disturb the others. He'd been careful to keep his phone charged. The library and fast food restaurants were good for that. The device was his lifeline, his connection to normalcy, even if he couldn't afford a data plan anymore. Wi-Fi hotspots were his best friend. He made his way to the community center that opened at 6 a.m. The staff knew him as the dedicated kid who used their facilities to shower and study before school. They didn't ask questions when he started showing up every morning. "Early bird again, huh?" said the front desk lady with a kind smile. "Basketball court's all yours if you want to shoot some hoops before the morning rush." "Thanks, ma'am," he replied with a genuine smile. These small kindnesses kept him going. After a quick shower and changing into his cleanest shirt, Dayon headed to the school 40 minutes before the first bell. The library was open early, and the librarian, Ms. Thompson, always greeted him with a nod but no questions. She'd noticed his pattern of early arrivals and late departures but respected his privacy. Sometimes she'd accidentally leave granola bars or fruit on his usual table. "Big test today?" she asked as he settled into his usual spot. "Algebra. Been studying, but those equations don't always stick," he admitted. "You'll do fine. You've got a good head for patterns," she encouraged before heading back to her desk. The school day passed in a blur of classes, careful social interactions, and avoiding questions about his home life. Dayon had become skilled at deflecting, at making himself both visible and invisible as needed. Visible to teachers when answering questions, invisible when conversations turned to family weekend plans or where everyone hung out after school. His algebra test went better than expected. Numbers made sense to him. They were constant, reliable in a way people often weren't. His English teacher did comment on his shirt but seemed satisfied when he explained that his washing machine was broken, and they were doing laundry by hand for a while. After school, Dayon headed to the small grocery store where he worked 3 hours each day, stocking shelves and helping customers to their cars. The manager, a gruff but fair man named Mr. Chen, had hired him without asking too many questions when Dayon explained he needed work after school to help his grandmother with bills. "You're a good worker," Mr. Chen had told him after the first week. "Don't see many young people take pride in doing simple jobs well." Today, as Dayon carefully arranged cans of soup in neat rows, Mr. Chen approached with an unusual request. "Got a delivery coming in late today. Need someone to stay an extra hour. Pay you cash for the overtime." He paused, studying Dayon's face. "Could use the help if you don't need to rush home." "I can stay," Dayon said quickly, perhaps too quickly. An extra hour of work meant a few more dollars. A few more dollars meant maybe a hot meal tonight. Mr. Chen nodded, a flicker of something, concern perhaps, crossing his face. "There's leftover lunch in the break room. My wife always packs too much. You'd be doing me a favor if you ate it." Dayon recognized the kindness disguised as a favor asked. He'd noticed this pattern with certain adults. They found ways to help without making him feel like charity. "Thanks, Mr. Chen, I'd appreciate that." The extra hour turned into 2, and by the time Dayon left the store, night had fallen completely. His earnings tucked safely away, he bought a hot sandwich from the convenience store before heading back toward the abandoned factory. The night was clearer than the previous one, stars visible between the city buildings. Dayon walked with purpose, avoiding eye contact with passers-by, shoulders squared against the world. As he passed an alley, sounds of a scuffle reached his ears. Most nights he would have walked faster, knowing the dangers of getting involved in other people's business. But something made him pause. A voice that sounded young, frightened. Peering cautiously down the alley, he saw 2 older teens cornering a younger boy, maybe 12 or 13. They were going through his backpack while the kid tried unsuccessfully to grab it back. "Hey," Dayon called out before he could stop himself. "Leave him alone." The older teens turned, sizing him up. Dayon was tall for 16 but slim. Not exactly intimidating. For a moment he regretted his decision. "Mind your business," one of them spat. Dayon stepped fully into the alley, heart hammering. 3 guys picking on 1 kid is my business. Just let him go. Something in his voice, a quiet determination perhaps, made them hesitate. The younger boy took advantage of their distraction to snatch his backpack and dart behind Dayon. After a tense moment, the older teens backed off, muttering threats but ultimately deciding the confrontation wasn't worth it. "You okay?" Dayon asked the boy once they were alone. The kid nodded, clutching his backpack. "Thanks, they followed me from the bus stop." "Where you headed?" "Home, my mom's working late. I was at my cousin's house." He looked up at Dayon with gratitude. "I'm Ty." "Dayon, come on, I'll walk you to your building." As they walked, Ty chatted nervously about school and basketball. Dayon listened, offering occasional comments, finding comfort in this normal conversation. When they reached Ty's apartment building, a modest but well-maintained complex, the boy hesitated at the entrance. "You want to come up? My mom won't be home for an hour, but there's leftover pizza. Least I can do." The offer was tempting, warmth, food, a moment of normalcy. But Dayon shook his head. "Thanks, but I should get..." T going, you stay safe, okay? Ty nodded, then surprised Dion with a quick hug before disappearing inside. Dion stood there a moment longer, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. Pride at having helped someone weaker, sadness at the normal home life just beyond that door, determination to someday have a place of his own again. With a deep breath, he turned and continued into the night, shoulders a little straighter than before. Tomorrow would be another day of pretending, surviving and working toward a future that sometimes seemed impossibly distant. But tonight, at least, he'd remembered who he was beyond his circumstances. Not just a homeless kid, but someone who still had something to give. 2 weeks had passed since Dion had helped young Ty escape the bullies. Life continued its difficult rhythm: school, work, finding places to sleep, and above all, keeping his homelessness hidden from the world. The abandoned factory had become his most reliable shelter, though he never stayed more than 2 nights in a row, worried that predictable patterns might make him vulnerable. Rain had been falling steadily all day, a cold autumn downpour that soaked through shoes and chilled to the bone. By the time Dion finished his shift at the grocery store, the streets had become small rivers, and his worn sneakers squelched with every step. "Weather's terrible out there," Mr. Chen said as Dion prepared to leave. "You sure someone can't pick you up?" "It's not far," Dion replied with a forced smile. "I don't mind a little rain." Mr. Chen frowned, then reached under the counter and pulled out an umbrella. "Take this at least. Bring it back tomorrow." Dion accepted the umbrella gratefully. These small kindnesses were becoming harder to brush off as his situation stretched on. Sometimes he wondered if Mr. Chen suspected the truth. Outside, the rain hammered against the umbrella, providing little protection against the wind that blew water sideways. Dion decided to take a shortcut through Hampton Park, a sprawling green space that separated the commercial district from the residential neighborhoods beyond. During the day, the park was filled with joggers and families. At night, especially in this weather, it would be deserted. The park paths were muddy, but at least the trees provided some shelter from the driving rain. Dion walked quickly, eager to reach the factory before the worst of his clothes got soaked. His backpack contained his schoolbooks wrapped in plastic bags. Protecting them was his top priority. A flash of lightning illuminated the park, followed almost immediately by a crash of thunder that shook the ground. The storm was directly overhead now. Dion picked up his pace, nearly jogging along the winding path. Another lightning flash revealed something unusual ahead, a figure slumped against a tree just off the path. At first, Dion thought it might be another homeless person seeking shelter, but something about the way the person was positioned seemed wrong. Caution told him to keep moving. Curiosity and concern pulled him closer. "Hello?" Dion called out, approaching slowly. "You okay?" No response came from the figure. A man, Dion could now see, dressed in expensive-looking outdoor gear. A hiking backpack lay beside him. The man's head was slumped forward, his breathing labored. Dion crouched down, still keeping some distance. "Sir, do you need help?" The man's head lifted slowly. His face was pale and sweaty despite the cool air. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "Snake," the man gasped, pointing weakly to his leg. "Bit me." Trying to reach phone, Dion's eyes widened. He shined his phone's flashlight toward the man's leg. Just above the ankle, 2 distinct puncture marks were visible, the skin around them already swollen and discolored. "Where's your phone, sir?" Dion asked urgently. "Dropped it. Somewhere there." The man gestured vaguely toward the underbrush, trying to find help when collapsed. Dion searched quickly, sweeping his flashlight across the wet ground. After a minute that seemed like forever, he spotted the phone, a high-end model half buried in mud several feet away. He grabbed it, but the screen remained black. "Dead or damaged by water?" "It's not working," Dion said, returning to the man's side. "How long ago were you bitten?" "Maybe 30 minutes, the man winced. "Getting worse. Can't feel my foot now." Dion knew enough about snake bites to understand this was serious. The man needed medical attention fast. He pulled out his own phone, but as he feared, there was no signal in this part of the park during the storm. "I need to get you to a hospital," Dion said firmly. "Can you walk at all?" The man tried to stand but immediately fell back against the tree, his face contorted with pain. "Legs not working right." Dion made a quick decision. "I'm going to help you. Put your arm around my shoulder." Despite being thin from months of irregular meals, Dion was strong from years of basketball and now daily survival. He positioned himself under the man's arm and lifted. The man was heavier than he looked, and Dion staggered slightly before finding his balance. "What's your name, sir?" Dion asked as they began moving slowly along the path. "Thomas," the man replied through gritted teeth. "Thomas Blackwood. I'm Dion. We need to get to the street to find help. It's about half a mile." "Think you can make it?" Thomas nodded weakly. "No choice, right?" They made painfully slow progress through the park. The rain continued to pour, and Dion had abandoned the umbrella to better support Thomas's weight. Every few steps they had to stop as waves of pain washed over the older man. "Talk to me," Dion urged when Thomas's eyes began to droop. "Stay awake. Tell me what you were doing in the park." "Nature photography," Thomas managed. "Saw a rare bird. Followed it too far from the path. So stupid. Should have been more careful." "You take pictures professionally?" Thomas attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Just a hobby. I run. Real estate company. Buildings pay the bills, but nature feeds the soul." Another bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating Thomas's face. His lips had taken on a bluish tinge and his skin was becoming clammy. "Not good signs. We're halfway there," Dion encouraged, though he wasn't entirely sure. The paths looked different in the darkness and rain. "Just keep talking. Why are you in the park? This weather?" Thomas asked between labored breaths. Dion hesitated. "Shortcut home." Thomas seemed to study him through pain-glazed eyes. "Good kid. Helping stranger. Anyone would do the same," Dion replied, adjusting his grip as Thomas stumbled. "No." Thomas shook his head slightly. "They wouldn't." After what seemed like hours but was probably 20 minutes, they finally reached the edge of the park. The street beyond was deserted, no cars in sight. Dion helped Thomas to a bus shelter, at least getting them out of the direct rainfall. Checking his phone again, Dion found one bar of signal. Enough to call for help. He dialed 911 and quickly explained the situation. "Ambulance coming," he told Thomas after ending the call. 10 minutes, Thomas nodded, his breathing becoming more shallow. "My leg? Can't feel it at all now." "The paramedics will help," Dion assured him, though worry gnawed at his stomach. He didn't know much about snake bites, but he knew some could be deadly if not treated quickly. "In my backpack," Thomas said suddenly. "Inside pocket? There's a card. My doctor's number. Call him." Dion realized the backpack was still under the tree where they'd found Thomas. "I left it back there. I'm sorry, I was focused on getting you out." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "Not your fault, just thank you. Whatever happens, don't talk like that." "Help is coming," Dion said firmly. "Just stay with me." To keep Thomas alert, Dion began asking him questions about his photography, about the birds he'd seen, about anything he could think of. The older man's answers became shorter, his words slurring slightly, but he fought to stay conscious. In the distance, the welcome sound of sirens pierced the storm's rumble. Dion had never been so happy to see flashing lights as the ambulance pulled up to the curb. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, asking quick questions as they examined Thomas and started an IV. "Copperhead bite. Looks like," one of them said, inspecting the wound. "Good thing you got him here fast, kid. These can go bad quickly." As they loaded Thomas onto a stretcher, the older man reached out and grasped Dion's wrist with surprising strength. "Come with me," he said, his eyes suddenly clear and focused. "Please," Dion glanced at the paramedic, who shrugged. "You can ride along if you want." "We need to move now, though." For a moment, Dion hesitated. Going to the hospital meant questions about his parents, his home, his situation. But the desperation in Thomas's eyes made the decision for him. "Okay," he agreed. "I'll come." In the ambulance, the paramedics worked steadily, checking Thomas's vitals and administering what they explained was anti-venom. One of them asked Dion if he was family. "No," Dion answered truthfully. "Just happened to find him in the park." "Lucky for him you did," the paramedic commented. "Another hour out there, and we might be telling a different story." Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride. But each time his eyes opened, they sought out Dion, as if making sure he was still there. Something in that gaze made Dion feel anchored, needed in a way he hadn't experienced since Grandma Lou died. At the hospital, everything happened quickly. Thomas was wheeled away for treatment while Dion was left in the waiting room, suddenly aware of his soaked clothes and the puddle forming beneath his chair. A nurse approached with a clipboard. "We need some informati." On about the patient. You said you're not family, but do you know how we can contact his relatives? Dion shook his head. I just met him tonight. All I know is his name is Thomas Blackwood, and he said he runs a real estate company. The nurse's eyes widened slightly. Thomas Blackwood? Of Blackwood Properties. I don't know, Dion admitted. Is that important? She didn't answer directly, just nodded and walked briskly to the front desk, where she spoke in hushed tones with another staff member. Both glanced back at Dion with curious expressions. An hour passed. Dion's clothes began to dry in the heated waiting room, leaving him stiff and uncomfortable. He should leave. There was nothing more he could do here, and Thomas was in good hands. Yet something kept him rooted to the uncomfortable plastic chair. Finally, a doctor emerged and approached him. You're the young man who brought in Mr. Blackwood? Dion nodded, standing up. Is he okay? He's stabilized. The anti-venom is working, but he'll need to stay for observation for at least 24 hours. The doctor studied Dion with curious eyes. He's asking for you. For me? Dion was surprised. Why? He says he has something important to tell you. Normally we only allow family at this hour, but... The doctor gestured for Dion to follow. Thomas lay in a hospital bed, looking pale but much more alert than he had in the park. When he saw Dion, a genuine smile crossed his face. You stayed, he said simply. Dion shrugged. Wanted to make sure you were okay. Thanks to you, I will be. Thomas's gaze was penetrating, as if seeing past Dion's carefully constructed facade. The doctor says if you hadn't found me when you did, I might not have made it. Just lucky timing, Dion replied uncomfortably. No. Thomas shook his head slowly. I don't believe in luck. I believe in purpose. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Where do you live, Dion? The question hit like a physical blow. Dion looked away, scrambling for the lie he'd told so many times. But something about nearly watching this man die made the usual deception stick in his throat. Around, he finally answered, the word hanging in the air between them. Thomas nodded, as if this vague answer had confirmed something. I thought so. No kid walks through Hampton Park in a thunderstorm as a shortcut, unless they don't have somewhere better to be. Dion remained silent, shame and defiance warring within him. I have a proposal for you, Thomas continued quietly. But first I need to know your story, the real one. Dion met the older man's eyes, searching for judgment or pity. He found neither, just patient interest and something else he couldn't quite name. Something that felt strangely like recognition. Dion stood by the hospital room window watching raindrops race down the glass while deciding how much of himself to reveal. Behind him, Thomas waited patiently from his bed, the steady beep of monitors the only sound between them. My grandma died 3 months ago, Dion finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. She raised me since I was little. My mom's not in the picture. Never knew my dad. He turned to face Thomas, bracing himself for the pity that usually followed such admissions. Instead, the older man simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. No other family to take you in? Dion shook his head. Got a cousin in Chicago, but she's got 4 kids already in a 2-bedroom apartment. He took a deep breath. I didn't want to go into the system. Heard too many stories, so I just stayed. In our house. For a while. Then the landlord figured out Grandma Lou was gone. Said I couldn't stay without an adult on the lease. Dion's fingers traced patterns on the windowsill. Been moving around since then? And school? Thomas asked. Never missed a day, Dion said, a hint of pride cutting through his embarrassment. Got all A's and B's, no one there knows. Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. That can't be easy. It's not, Dion admitted. But Grandma Lou always said education was the only thing nobody could take from you. So I keep going. A knock at the door interrupted them as a nurse entered to check Thomas's vitals. She glanced curiously at Dion but said nothing about his presence at this late hour. Blood pressure's better, she noted, making marks on Thomas's chart. How's the pain level? Manageable, Thomas replied. When can I get out of here? Doctor wants you at least 24 hours for observation. Snake bites can be tricky. She adjusted his. Fee, you're lucky your son found you when he did. Neither Thomas nor Dion corrected her assumption as she finished her checks and left the room. You've been wearing those wet clothes for hours, Thomas observed once they were alone again. There's a hospital gift shop downstairs. Probably has some basic things. I'm fine, Dion said automatically. Thomas reached for the small table beside his bed, wincing slightly at the movement. He picked up his wallet and extracted a credit card. "Take this. Get yourself something dry to wear and maybe some food from the cafeteria. You must be hungry." Dion stared at the offered card, his pride warring with practical need. "I can't." "You can and you will," Thomas said firmly. "You probably saved my life tonight. The least I can do is make sure you don't catch pneumonia in my hospital room." After a moment's hesitation, Dion accepted the card. "I'll bring you the receipt." "I trust you," Thomas said simply, those 3 words hitting Dion with unexpected force. How long had it been since an adult had trusted him with anything? The gift shop was small but had the basics. Sweatpants, t-shirts, hoodies, all emblazoned with the hospital logo. Dion selected the least expensive options in his size, added a pair of flip-flops since his shoes were soaked through, and headed to the nearest bathroom to change. The face that greeted him in the mirror looked younger somehow. The wariness in his eyes temporarily softened. For the first time in months, someone knew his truth and hadn't immediately tried to call social services. After changing, Dion followed signs to the cafeteria. Despite the late hour, it was still open, serving a limited menu to night shift workers and visitors. He ordered a sandwich, soup, and a large chocolate milk, trying to ignore the guilty voice in his head that said he was taking advantage of Thomas's generosity. When he returned to the room, Thomas was on the phone, his voice low and serious. He ended the call as Dion entered. "Feel better?" he asked, eyeing Dion's dry clothes. "Much. Thank you." Dion handed back the credit card and receipt. "I tried to keep it reasonable." Thomas waved this off. "Sit, eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks." That was truer than Dion wanted to admit. He sat in the visitor's chair and unwrapped his sandwich, suddenly ravenous. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence as Dion ate, and Thomas seemed lost in thought. "I have a proposition for you," Thomas finally said. "My house has a guest apartment over the garage. It's nothing fancy. Bedroom, bathroom, small living area with a kitchenette. It's been empty since my daughter went off to college 3 years ago." Dion stopped mid-bite, unsure he'd heard correctly. "I need someone to help around the property," Thomas continued. "Yard work, running errands, that sort of thing. In exchange for the apartment and a small stipend. No strings attached. If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings." "Why?" Dion asked, the single word encompassing all his confusion and suspicion. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." Thomas's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'm a pretty good judge of character. Have to be in my business. And I know that a kid who risks his own safety to help a stranger in a storm, who stays at the hospital to make sure that stranger is okay, who maintains perfect grades while homeless, that's someone worth investing in." "I don't need charity," Dion said, his back stiffening. "Good, because I'm not offering any. I'm offering a job with housing included. You'll work for everything you get." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "Look, I live alone in a house that's too big for me. I travel often for business. Having someone responsible on the property would actually help me out." Dion set down his sandwich, appetite suddenly gone as his mind raced. It sounded too good to be true, which usually meant it was. Yet there was something about Thomas's straightforward manner that made Dion want to trust him. "What about school?" he asked. "I'm not dropping out. Wouldn't dream of asking you to. Education comes first. Work hours would be after school and weekends. And what about legal stuff?" "I'm still a minor," Thomas nodded. "That's a fair question. I just got off the phone with my lawyer. There are options, temporary guardianship being the simplest. But we can figure that out later if you decide to accept." The thought of having a real roof over his head, a safe place to sleep and study, was almost overwhelming. But Dion had learned the hard way that nothing in life came without complications. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course, but you need somewhere to stay tonight, and I'm stuck here." Thomas gestured to his IV. "My assistant is bringing some things for me in the morning. She can take you to the house, show you the apartment. You can get a feel for the place before making any decisions." Before Dion could respond, the same nurse returned. "Visiting hours were over a long time ago, young man. I've looked the other way, but you really should let Mr. Blackwood rest now." "He's staying," Thomas said with quiet authority. "He has nowhere else to go tonight. I'll take full responsibility." The nurse hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll bring in a recliner." "Best I can do." After she left, Dion looked at Thomas with new respect. "Do you always get your way like that?" A small smile played at the older man's lips. Not always. But I've found that speaking with conviction often works wonders. His expression grew serious again. No pressure about my offer. The apartment is yours tonight regardless of what you decide tomorrow. The nurse returned with an orderly who wheeled in a padded recliner. They provided Dion with a pillow and blanket, far more comfortable accommodations than he'd had in months. As the lights dimmed and Thomas drifted off to sleep, Dion lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Part of him wanted to grab his backpack and run, to return to the familiar discomfort of life on his own terms. Another part, the part that remembered having a home, desperately wanted to say yes to Thomas's offer. Morning came with sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of hospital routine in full swing. Dion woke to find Thomas already up, looking considerably better than the night before. A woman in a crisp business suit stood beside his bed, her expression shifting from professional to curious as Dion sat up. "Dion, this is Ms. Rivera, my executive assistant," Thomas said. "Lisa, this is Dion, the young man I told you about." Ms. Rivera extended her hand, her handshake firm. "Mr. Blackwood speaks very highly of you. It's nice to meet you." Dion straightened his hospital gift shop clothes, acutely aware of how out of place he must look. "Nice to meet you too, ma'am. Lisa will take you to the house while I finish up here," Thomas explained. "The doctors say I can go home this afternoon if all my tests come back good." "I brought clothes for you, Mr. Blackwood," Ms. Rivera said, setting a small suitcase on a chair. "And I've rescheduled your meetings for the next 3 days as you requested." She turned to Dion. "Ready to go whenever you are." Dion gathered his few belongings, suddenly nervous. "I don't want to be any trouble." "No trouble at all," she assured him. Mr. Blackwood explained everything. Thomas caught Dion's eye. "Remember, no pressure. Just take a look at the place." The drive to Thomas's home was silent at first, Dion watching the neighborhoods change from urban to increasingly affluent suburbs. Finally, Ms. Rivera turned onto a private drive lined with oak trees. "Has Mr. Blackwood always been this trusting?" Dion asked as they approached a large but tasteful house set back from the road. Ms. Rivera glanced at him. "Actually, no. He's usually very cautious, especially since his wife passed 5 years ago. You must have made quite an impression." The car circled around to the side of the house where a detached 3-car garage stood. A separate staircase led to an apartment above. "Here we are," Ms. Rivera said, parking. "Let me show you around." The apartment was bigger than Dion had imagined. A sunny living room with comfortable furniture, a small but well-equipped kitchen, a bedroom with a real bed, and a bathroom with both shower and tub. Simple but clean, with large windows overlooking gardens behind the main house. This was where Mr. Blackwood's daughter lived during her last year of high school, Ms. Rivera explained. She wanted more independence before college. Dion ran his hand along a bookshelf stocked with novels and reference books. "It's really nice. The refrigerator is stocked with basics. I wasn't sure what you like, so I got a variety." She handed him a key. "This opens both the apartment and the side entrance to the main house." The gesture of trust was not lost on Dion. "Thank you. Mr. Blackwood also asked me to give you this." She passed him an envelope. Inside was $200 cash and a note, for necessities. "We'll talk when I get home. I'll leave you to get settled," Ms. Rivera said, moving toward the door. "Mr. Blackwood should be home around 4. Feel free to explore the grounds, but the main house is locked except for the side entrance. Any questions?" Dion had 1,000 questions, but he shook his head. "No, ma'am. Thank you." After she left, Dion stood in the middle of the apartment, overcome by the sudden silence and solitude. For the first time in months, he was alone in a safe, clean space that offered more than just temporary shelter. He moved to the bathroom and turned on the shower, adjusting the temperature until steam began to rise. As hot water washed over him, a luxury he'd been limited to quick rinses at the community center, reality began to sink in. Yesterday, he'd been homeless, hiding his circumstances from everyone. Today, he stood in an apartment that could be his, offered by a wealthy stranger he'd helped on a rainy night. It felt like something from a movie, not real life. As he dried off with a fluffy towel, a thought struck him. What would Grandma Lou think of all this? Would she approve of him accepting help from Thomas, or would she worry about strings attached that weren't yet visible? "Take measure of a person's actions, not just their words," she used to say. So far, Thomas's actions had been nothing but generous. Dion dressed in his now dry regular clothes, leaving the hospital outfit neatly folded on the bed. He spent the next few hours exploring the apartment, then the grounds around the house. The property was beautiful. Landscaped gardens, a small pond, even a half basketball court hidden behind a row of hedges. By the time he heard a car in the driveway, Dion had made his decision. This opportunity was too good to pass up, whatever complications might come with it. For the first time since Grandma Lou died, he allowed himself to feel something dangerous: hope. The first weeks of living in Thomas's guest apartment felt like a dream to Dion. Having a safe place to sleep every night, hot showers whenever he wanted, and a fully stocked refrigerator were luxuries he'd nearly forgotten. Most precious of all was the quiet. No need to stay constantly alert for danger, no fighting for space or resources. Thomas had returned from the hospital moving slower than usual, but otherwise recovering well. True to his word, he didn't pressure Dion for an immediate decision about staying long-term, though Dion had already made up his mind. Where else would he go? They settled into a tentative routine. Dion went to school during the day while Thomas worked either from his home office or at his company headquarters downtown. After school, Dion would complete his homework, then tackle the list of chores Thomas left for him. Nothing excessive, just normal property maintenance that the older man had been neglecting since his housekeeper retired months ago. On this particular afternoon, Dion was raking leaves in the sprawling backyard when Thomas emerged from the house carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "You've been at it for hours," Thomas observed, handing Dion a glass. "Take a break." Dion accepted the drink gratefully, suddenly aware of how tired his arms were. "Thanks. I wanted to finish before it gets dark." "The leaves will still be there tomorrow," Thomas said with a small smile. "Come sit for a minute." They moved to a stone bench near the small pond. Fall was in full swing and the water reflected the fiery colors of the surrounding trees. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea. "How's school going?" Thomas finally asked. "Good. Got an A on my history paper." "The one about the civil rights movement?" "That's excellent." Dion nodded, still surprised at how Thomas remembered these details. His grandmother had been the only person who'd ever shown such interest in his schoolwork. "Coach asked me to join the basketball team again," Dion added. Thomas looked over. "Again? You played before? Last year?" "Had to quit when—" Dion didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what had happened. "You should do it," Thomas encouraged. "You've got the height for it," Dion stared into his glass. "Practice is after school. Games are mostly Friday nights. I wouldn't be able to do as much work around here." "The work will get done when it gets done," Thomas said dismissively. "School activities are more important. Besides," he added with a wink, "I might enjoy watching a game or two." The idea of Thomas coming to his games stirred complicated feelings in Dion. Part of him liked the thought of having someone in the stands cheering for him. Another part worried about what his teammates would think. "We should probably talk about the legal stuff," Dion said, changing the subject. "If I'm staying." Thomas set his glass down. "Are you? Staying, I mean." "If you still want me to," Dion replied, trying to sound casual despite how much the answer mattered. "I do," Thomas said simply. "My lawyer has drawn up temporary guardianship papers. Nothing permanent, just enough to satisfy the school and medical requirements. You'd still be your own person." The word guardian hung in the air between them. It felt both weighty and fragile, like a promise that could easily shatter. "What would people think?" Dion asked softly. "You know, a white man taking in a black kid out of nowhere." "People might talk." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Let them. I've never much cared what people think." "It's different for me," Dion said, meeting Thomas's gaze. "People will assume things," understanding crossed Thomas's face. "They might. But the people who matter will take the time to learn the truth." He hesitated. "My wife and I always wanted more children after our daughter. It never happened for us. Then Cynthia got sick and, well, priorities shifted." It was the first time Thomas had shared anything so personal, and Dion wasn't sure how to respond. He settled for a nod. "What I'm trying to say," Thomas continued, "is that having you here, it feels right. But I don't want to replace your family or pretend this isn't complicated. I'm offering a safe place, support for your education, and maybe some guidance when you want it. The rest is up to you." Dion took a deep breath. "I'd like to stay." Thomas smiled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Good, that's good." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming in the front driveway. Thomas frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone," he said, standing up. They walked around the side of the house to find a sleek sports car parked haphazardly near the garage. A woman in her 20s was retrieving a designer suitcase from the trunk. "Dad?" she called out, spotting Thomas. "Surprise?" Thomas's face lit up with genuine delight. "Audrey, what are you doing home? I thought you were in Europe until Christmas." The young woman, Thomas's daughter Dion realized, dropped her bag and rushed to hug her father. "Change of plans. The internship ended early and I thought, why not come surprise my favorite dad?" Her eyes landed on Dion, standing awkwardly a few steps behind Thomas. "Oh, hello. New gardener?" Dion felt his face grow hot. Thomas cleared his throat. "Audrey, this is Dion. He's staying in the apartment over the garage and helping out around the property." Thomas turned slightly. "Dion, this is my daughter, Audrey." Audrey's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Living here? That's different." "It's a long story," Thomas said. "One I'll tell you inside." "Dion, would you mind bringing Audrey's bags to the house while I get her settled?" "No problem," Dion replied, grateful for the excuse to escape the uncomfortable scrutiny of Audrey's gaze. As he gathered her expensive luggage, he could hear their conversation moving toward the house. "Since when do you have a live-in assistant, Dad? And he's so young. He's 16 and it's complicated. You'll understand when—" Their voices faded as they entered the house. Dion followed slowly, his earlier contentment evaporating. Of course Thomas had a family. Of course they would have questions. He'd been naive to think this arrangement would be simple. After dropping Audrey's bags in the foyer, Dion retreated to his apartment, suddenly feeling like an intruder. He should finish his homework, but concentration proved impossible as his mind raced with concerns about what Thomas was telling his daughter and how she would react. An hour later, a knock at his door jolted him from his worried thoughts. He opened it to find Thomas standing there. "Can I come in?" Thomas asked. Dion stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. "Sure, everything okay?" Thomas sat on the small sofa, looking tired. "I told Audrey everything. How we met, your situation, our arrangement." She was surprised, but she understands. "Does she?" Dion asked, unable to keep the doubt from his voice. "She will," Thomas amended. "Audrey's a good person, just protective of me since her mother died. She worries." Dion nodded, though the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. "Maybe I should make myself scarce while she's visiting. I could stay at the factory again just for a few—" "Absolutely not," Thomas interrupted firmly. "This is your home now. You're not going anywhere." The word home caught Dion off guard. Was that what this place had become in just a few short weeks? "I want you to join us for dinner," Thomas continued. "Audrey's ordering from that Italian place in town that you liked." Dion shook his head. "I don't think that's a good idea. She just got here and you two probably have a lot to catch up on. All the more reason for you to be there," Thomas insisted. "You're part of this household now. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "it'll be good for Audrey to see that I haven't completely lost my mind letting a teenager live in the garage apartment." Dinner that evening was among the most uncomfortable experiences of Dion's life. Audrey was polite but distant, asking Dion surface-level questions about school and basketball while her eyes conveyed deeper suspicion. Thomas tried to bridge the gap between them, but his efforts only highlighted the awkwardness. "Dion's at the top of his class in math," Thomas mentioned proudly after a particularly long silence. "Reminds me of you at that age, Audrey. Is that so?" Audrey replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Planning on college, Dion?" "If I can get a scholarship," Dion answered honestly. "State University has a good engineering program." "Dad could probably pull some strings there," Audrey said, twirling pasta around her fork. "He's on the board of trustees after all." "I'd rather earn it myself," Dion responded, perhaps too quickly. Audrey's eyebrows rose. "Admirable, though sometimes it's smart to use the advantages available to you." "Dion's very independent," Thomas interjected. "He's been through a lot this year." "So you've said," Audrey murmured. She set down her fork and turned her full attention to Dion. "Look, I'm just going to be direct because that's how I am. My father is a generous man, sometimes to a fault. People have taken advantage of that before." "Audrey," Thomas warned. She held up a hand. "Let me finish, Dad. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I just want to be clear that I look out for my father's interests. Her gaze was steady on Dion. He says you saved his life. If that's true, then I owe you my gratitude. But this living arrangement is unusual. Dion met her gaze. I understand. You're worried I'm using him. I'd probably think the same thing in your position. And are you? She challenged. Audrey, that's enough, Thomas said sharply. It's okay, Dion assured him before turning back to Audrey. Your dad offered me a place to stay and a job when I had nothing. I'm grateful, but I'm not here for a handout. I work for what I get, and I don't take anything I haven't earned. Something in his tone must have registered with her because her expression softened slightly. Fair enough. Time will tell, I suppose. The rest of the meal passed in strained conversation, and Dion excused himself as soon as he could, pleading homework. Back in his apartment, he paced the small living room, second-guessing his decision to stay. He'd known it wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't anticipated feeling like an intruder in what he'd just begun to think of as home. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Opening the door, he found Audrey standing there, her earlier confidence somewhat muted. Can we talk? She asked. Dion stepped back to let her in, his guard still up. Sure. Audrey glanced around the apartment, taking in his school books neatly arranged on the desk, the basketball in the corner, the single-framed photo of his grandmother on the nightstand. Dad showed me the hospital report, she said abruptly. From the snake bite. The doctor wrote that if you hadn't found him when you did, he might not have survived. Dion shrugged uncomfortably. Anyone would have helped. No, she shook her head. They wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 and gone on their way if they stopped at all. You carried him half a mile in a thunderstorm. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkened garden. After Mom died, Dad changed. Became more isolated, more focused on work. I've been worried about him being alone in this big house. She turned to face Dion. I still have questions about all this, but I know my father. He's a good judge of character, and he sees something in you. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Dion said quietly, or take advantage. I believe you, Audrey replied, surprising him. But this is my dad, my only parent. I have to be sure. Dion nodded. I understand. I'd do the same for my grandmother if she were still here. A moment of recognition passed between them. Not quite acceptance, but a truce of sorts. Good night, Dion, Audrey said, moving toward the door. I'll be here for a week. I guess we'll be seeing more of each other. After she left, Dion sat on the edge of his bed, the day's emotional roller coaster leaving him exhausted. He picked up the photo of Grandma Lou, tracing her smiling face with his finger. What am I doing here? He whispered to her image. Is this right? No answer came, of course, but as he set the photo back down, he felt a strange sense of peace. His grandmother had always taught him to recognize blessings when they appeared, even in unexpected forms. Maybe that's what Thomas and this place were, an unexpected blessing in the storm of his life. Outside his window, light still burned in the main house, where Thomas and his daughter continued their reunion. Their family dynamic was complicated in its own way, just as Dion's life had its complications. Perhaps that was the nature of all families, whether born or chosen. Messy, imperfect, but necessary. With that thought, Dion turned to his neglected homework, determined to prove Audrey's suspicions wrong. Whatever else happened, he would not waste the opportunity he'd been given. 5 years had passed since that rainy night when Dion found Thomas dying from a snake bite in the park. 5 years that had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Dion's apartment, now considerably more personalized than when he'd first moved in. Basketball trophies lined one shelf, engineering textbooks another. Certificates and academic awards hung framed on the walls alongside photos capturing moments from the past 5 years. Dion in his high school graduation gown with Thomas proudly standing beside him. Dion receiving a full scholarship to State University, the two of them at a basketball game where Dion's team had won the regional championship. Today was special. Dion straightened his tie in the mirror, hardly recognizing the confident young man who stared back. At 21, he stood over 6 feet tall, his lanky teenage frame having filled out from years of basketball and proper nutrition. But the physical changes paled compared to the inner transformation. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, Dion called. Thomas entered, also dressed formally, in a tailored suit. At 67, his hair had turned completely silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he moved with the energy of a much younger man. "Ready for the big day?" Thomas asked, his eyes reflecting pride. Yes, he took in Dion's appearance. "As ready as I'll ever be," Dion replied, smoothing his already perfect tie. "Still can't believe it's happening." "Believe it. You've earned every bit of this." Thomas checked his watch. "The ceremony starts in 2 hours. Audrey texted that her flight landed on time. She's picking up your grandmother's cousin on the way." Dion nodded, grateful that his only remaining blood relative would be there to see this day. Cousin Tanya had moved back to Atlanta 3 years ago, and while she hadn't been able to take Dion in during his time of need, they'd developed a warm relationship since Thomas had entered his life. "How many people are coming to the opening?" Dion asked. "The mayor confirmed yesterday, so that's a yes for all the city officials. The press will be there, and about 50 kids and their families from the program." Thomas smiled. "It's going to be a full house." Dion took a deep breath, the reality of what they'd accomplished finally sinking in. Today marked the official opening of the Second Chance Center, a comprehensive housing and education facility for homeless youth, a project that had grown from a simple idea to a multi-million-dollar reality. Over the past 3 years, "I should practice my speech one more time," Dion said, reaching for the notes on his desk. Thomas shook his head. "You've practiced enough. It's perfect, just like everything else you put your mind to." The journey to this day hadn't been easy. After Audrey's initial skepticism during her visit 5 years ago, things had slowly improved. Her week-long stay had stretched to 2, as she observed the genuine connection forming between her father and Dion. By the time she left, she'd moved from suspicion to cautious acceptance. Thomas had kept his promise, serving as Dion's guardian while giving him space to be his own person. He attended every basketball game, helped with college applications, and taught Dion about business and investing, but never tried to replace the family Dion had lost. For his part, Dion had thrived with stability and support. He graduated high school as valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to study engineering at State University. But his experiences as a homeless teen had never left him. During his sophomore year of college, he approached Thomas with an idea that would change both their lives. "You don't have to come to campus today," Dion said now as they headed downstairs toward the kitchen. "I know you have that board meeting." "Canceled it," Thomas replied simply. "Some things are more important." The kitchen, once Thomas's lonely domain, had become the heart of their unconventional home. Even after Dion moved into the university dorms, he returned most weekends, and this space was where they had mapped out their vision for the Second Chance Center. Inns Rivera, still Thomas's loyal assistant after all these years, had laid out breakfast for them. She'd been skeptical of Dion at first, but had become one of his strongest advocates, especially as she witnessed the positive effect he had on her employer. The construction team sent the final inspection report, she informed them as they ate. "Everything passed with flying colors. The residence halls are ready for move-in next week." "And the scholarship fund?" Thomas asked. "Fully funded for the first 30 students," she replied with a satisfied nod. "The matching grant from Wilson Foundation came through yesterday." Dion felt a surge of emotion. From an idea sketched on napkins to a real facility that would house, educate, and support homeless teens, it seemed almost impossible. Thomas had provided the initial funding and business expertise, leveraging his connections to secure the land and additional investors. Dion had contributed the vision and first-hand understanding of what these kids really needed. Together, they'd created something neither could have accomplished alone. "Remember when we first talked about this?" Thomas asked, as if reading Dion's thoughts. "Junior year, spring break. You came home from college with all those statistics about youth homelessness." Dion smiled at the memory. "You thought I was just working on a class project. Then I showed you my business plan." "Best proposal I've ever seen," Thomas said, the pride evident in his voice. "I knew then that you were going to change lives, not just build buildings." The drive to the center took 30 minutes, their conversation comfortable and familiar. They'd traveled this road countless times during construction, watching as empty land transformed into a campus designed to give homeless youth what Dion had once desperately needed: safety, stability, and opportunity. As they pulled up to the impressive main building, Dion felt a momentary sense of unreality. The modern structure with its welcoming entrance seemed a world away from the abandoned factory, where he'd once sought shelter from the rain. Staff members were already bustling around, preparing for the ceremony. Thomas was immediately pulled aside by the public relations team, leaving Dion a moment to wander the grounds alone. He walked slowly through the central courtyard, past the residence halls designed to feel like homes rather than institutions. Each building housed 10 teens with live-in mentors, people who had experienced homelessness themselves and understood the journey. The education center housed classrooms and computer labs where residents would complete high school while learning practical skills. The recreation building included a basketball court that brought a particular smile to Dion's face, his specific request. "There you are," a familiar voice called out. Dion turned to see Audrey approaching, elegant as always in a blue dress, her face breaking into a genuine smile as she reached him. Their relationship had evolved dramatically over the years. After her initial wariness, she'd become something between a protective older sister and a supportive mentor, often joking that she'd gained a brother through the strangest of circumstances. "The place looks amazing," she said, linking her arm through his as they walked. "Dad can't stop talking about it to anyone who will listen. You'd think he was the one graduating with an engineering degree and opening a youth center at the same time." Dion laughed. "He's earned the right to brag. None of this happens without him." "Don't sell yourself short," Audrey countered. "This was your vision. Dad just helped with the execution." They reached the main stage area where chairs had been arranged for the ceremony. In 2 hours, this space would be filled with city officials, donors, press, and most importantly, the first group of teens who would call this place home. "Nervous?" Audrey asked, noting Dion's thoughtful expression. "A little," he admitted. "Not about the speech, but about living up to all this. What if we can't really help these kids? What if—" "Stop," Audrey interrupted gently. "You know better than anyone what they need, and you're not doing it alone." She was right. The center was staffed with professionals, counselors, teachers, job coaches, but its heart and soul came from people who truly understood. People like Mr. Pete, the homeless man who had once shared his apple with a hungry Dion in the park. Now clean, sober, and employed as the center's maintenance supervisor, he embodied the second chance philosophy. And Mr. Chen from the grocery store, who had offered Dion those extra hours when he needed them most. He now ran the center's culinary program, teaching teens to cook while sharing his business knowledge. As the guests began to arrive, Dion took his place near the podium. Thomas stood beside him, and together they greeted the mayor, various officials, and the donors whose contributions had helped make their vision a reality. But the most meaningful moment came when a group of teenagers arrived, eyes wide as they took in what would be their new home. Dion recognized the mixture of hope and wariness in their expressions, the same feelings he'd experienced when Thomas first showed him the apartment over the garage. One boy, about 16 with the same worn look Dion once carried, hung back from the others. Thomas noticed him too and nudged Dion gently. "Why don't you go talk to him? There's time before we start." Dion approached the teen, who stiffened slightly, his posture defensive. "What's your name?" Dion asked. "Andre." The boy replied cautiously. "I'm Dion. This place exists because of a night a lot like the ones you've probably been having lately." Andre's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you know about my nights?" "I know what it's like to fall asleep wondering if you'll be safe until morning," Dion said quietly. "I know what it's like to be hungry but still go to school and pretend everything's fine." The wariness in Andre's eyes shifted to surprise, then cautious interest. "For real? You were homeless?" "For real. 5 years ago I was sleeping in an abandoned factory not far from here." Dion gestured toward Thomas, who was speaking with the mayor nearby. "Then I met that man over there when he was dying from a snake bite in the park. Helping him changed both our lives." Andre looked skeptical. "Sounds like something from a movie." Dion smiled. "Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. But here's what I know for sure. Where you start doesn't determine where you finish. This place is just a beginning." Before Andre could respond, Ms. Rivera approached to let Dion know it was time to start the ceremony. As Dion took his place on stage, his eyes swept over the gathered crowd. Thomas in the front row beaming with pride. Audrey beside him. Cousin Tanya dabbing at emotional tears. Mr. Pete and Mr. Chen among the staff. And the teens, including Andre, watching with varying degrees of hope and skepticism. As the mayor introduced him, Dion felt a profound sense of coming full circle. 5 years ago, he'd been a homeless boy with nothing but determination and dreams. Today, he